Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Prime Live. Now, we do know that President Cyril Ramaphosa set bold objectives for South Africa's hosting of the G20 summit at this year's World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Now, let's take a look and then we'll see you right after this.
In pursuit of this objective and in giving effect to the mission of achieving or implementing what Nelson Mandela said, the mission of the G20 South Africa will focus on three themes: solidarity, inequality, and sustainable development. It is South Africa's firm view that these themes can best be taken forward through the collective actions of a number of institutions like the G20, as well as various multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organizations, the World Health Organizations, financial institutions of the world, some of which should be reformed and be made more representative and responsive to the needs of the citizens of the world. We will seek to get the G20 to focus more on how we can enhance solidarity through collective efforts to ensure that in the pursuit of progress in the world and progress for all, no person and no country should be left behind.
Now, to help us unpack South Africa's presidency of the G20 in 2025, I'm joined by Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba, CEO of TZoro Global Advisory and author of the book Demystifying the Jewel called ILO, A Labor of Love. Good evening, Professor. Welcome to Prime Live.
Good evening, and thank you for having me again on Prime Live.
We'll jump right straight into it. Now, South Africa makes history this year when President Ramaphosa assumed the 2025 presidency of the G20. It's the first time an African country has been given this honor. What are the potential benefits for our country and our continent?
So let's give a context. I think in your introduction, you talk about South Africa making history as being the first African country that's being given an opportunity to host the G20. The context is that, yes, South Africa is making history, but it is not in any way a surprise, nor is it Cyril Ramaphosa's doing that has done this. I think I just want to give the right context. So the G20 countries work on a rotation annually. So every year, a G20 country hosts everybody that's a member of the G20. It's always been known for the last 10 years that it will be South Africa's 10 this year. So I just want to give that context, okay?
Yes.
And South Africa is the only member up until now from Africa to be a member of the G20. It's only recently that other African countries are joining because now there's a G20 plus. But the original G20 has always been only South Africa from Africa. So it doesn't change the fact, though, that we are making history. The impact, of course, is that it places South Africa on the global stage for all the big part of the G20 to be with us, and for us, of course, to benefit from the tourism that will happen as a consequence of it, because as they come here, we are chairing and we are presiding for a whole year. So, and what also happens with the G20 is that it affects different departments and different parts of government. So, for instance, you'll have finance committee meetings, you'll have Department of Employment and Labor committee meetings, you'll have communications meetings, and so on and so on. It affects every facet of life in terms of those countries that are part of the G20. That's point number one. Secondly, there's the B20 and the L20. So business, I think I need to mention this, that my expertise in the G20 is because since 2009 until 2021, I was a member of South Africa representing South African business on the G20 and was able to actually co-chair some of the committees in Germany and in Italy. I co-chaired the education and employment committees. So South Africa will now be hosting those meetings for the B20. We'll also be hosting the meetings for the L20, which means the trade unions also will be here. So we're going to be having a lot of people. This is our opportunity as South Africa to showcase who we are in terms of our tripartism and in terms of how we are going to implement the things that are discussed in the G20.
Thank you so much for just clarifying that part. And I also wanted, I think you also covered the part about tourism, which was supposed to actually be something that I wanted us to just touch more on, but I think you've covered that. But in terms of, I just want you to touch base more on Labor 20 and Business 20. Tell us about the work of these committees, just in more details.
Well, the work of these committees, and this is a little known fact, because when people talk G20, they always think of the governments, right? And how I got involved in the G20 was because also of my ILO, roles that I was playing. And in the ILO, you will know that everything works in a tripartite fashion. So anything that's done by the government, the business people have to do, and the labor also has to come into it, because it works via tripartism and via consensus. Now, how the committees work is that business will meet on its own and labor will meet on its own, having their own deliberations on all the different topics that have been agreed for the year. And then ultimately, you then have the conference where the G for government and the B for business and the L for labor will be together discussing things in a tripartite format. And then you will have a situation where the G will then, as the driver of the process, when everything has been done, will then be signing the resolutions and taking the resolutions that come from the South African conversations of the G, B, and the L. And then it is then the role of South Africa to ensure that implementation for all the countries that are members of the G20 is something that's going to be carried over and handed over to the next country that will be presiding over the G20. So the G, the B, and the L do work, but this work is continuing every year. So from the past G20 to this G20 to the next G20, it is a continuous work, very important and needs to be watched, is whether we are making any progress in implementation. Because the tendency of the G, B, and the L is that there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of talk, we keep moving from one country to the next. I can tell you all the countries from 2009 where we've been to today. And the question we need to be asking is, has there any work being done as a result of the G20 moving from one country?
Thank you so much, Professor Mthunzi. We got caught up a bit there, but we're just gonna move on to the next question. Now, at this year's World Economic Forum, President Ramaphosa gave a keynote speech in which he outlined his objectives for G20 summit. Now, one of them was investment in African infrastructure, skills development, and women's economic empowerment. Are you confident that there is still appetite for FDI as the age of protectionism is upon us now?
Well, the World Economic Forum is a platform at which, again, many promises are made by those who go to Davos in terms of what they plan for the world. And I have no doubt that these are noble intentions to have, investment in African infrastructure, in skills development, and in women's economic empowerment. For me, the last comment I made when you asked me about what happens with the G20 and the B20 and the L20, a lot of talk and very little implementation. Some parts of it more successful than others. For example, the G20, B20, L20 that involve productivity under the labor section. The last time before moving to South Africa, they were working on productivity. And I know that they are pushing for productivity to be something that they implement, and where all countries that are members of the G20 will likewise galvanized support for it. Now, in the same year, for foreign finally come, we've got G and actually implementable ideas that we take to people. Africa is a big focus for the world. There isn't much anywhere else that can grow better than what we can do in Africa. But we are the ones who need to be, I'm looking for a word that we need to be unapologetic about who we are, about how we do things. We need to demonstrate to the world our capacity to implement. And we know we're competent people, but I think we always tend to be starstruck by people outside our continent, rather than calling them and sitting them at the table and showing them not only do they owe us the foreign direct investment, but that they need to deliver because it is the best investment for them as a destination. There isn't anywhere else where they can get the kind of returns they can get from us. So yes, there is protectionism, but in terms of where people can get a return for investment, we are the best destination for this.
Thank you so much for just, giving us more insight on that. But like before I let you go, finally, as a member of the G20, do you think Donald Trump will come to South Africa, as he has not been to an African country, even in his previous term? And if he does come, what could this do for America's reputation on this continent?
So here's the thing, we're all on a journey, and we all either get on the train or the bus or the aeroplane. So this is not about Donald Trump. It's much bigger than Donald Trump. The G20 and the G20 plus members that are joining now have an economic power that is bigger than the one of America. So, and that there is life beyond the United States of America, will move on and will be successful. But should he come, I think it would do a little bit of making people understand that he's not always all bad, and the United States of America has to humble itself and be modest enough to understand that there are other forces in the complexity or the geo-complexity of the world. And they either get on the train or the bus or the plane or get left behind. Life will go on.
No, that's definitely the truth. But thank you so much, Professor Mthunzi, just for helping us unpack this and making us understand further on what to be expected and what everything stands for. So thank you so much for borrowing us your precious time. We will hopefully see you next time so that you can help us unpack more important topics like this one.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. Viewers at home, that was Professor Mthunzi, was just helping us, unpack all the things that we need to know about the G20 summit that's happening in 2025. But without wasting any time, we will go to a quick ad break. We will see you right after this, so stay tuned for more content.